In the region of Arabia, the number of believers of Prophet Abraham decreased considerably and people began to worship statues and idols they had built. After the elephant incident, the value of Kaaba increased a lot in the eyes of people, and Mecca became a destination for a great number of people for pilgrimage from nearby areas. The Meccans made their living through trade. Thanks to the pagans coming and going in Mecca, some Meccan merchants added richness to their wealth. Read with the name of your Lord, who created. He created man from a clod. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, the one who taught to write with a pen, the one who taught man all what he didn't know. It had been 3 years since the last of the prophets, our Prophet Muhammad, was given the duty of prophecy. After 3 years of secret invitation, Allah said, "Tell clearly what you are commanded to do. Turn away from the polytheists. We are enough for you against those who ridicule." Upon those verses, the invitation to Islam began to be made openly. However, this invitation was never in the interest of the polytheists of Mecca, especially the rich ones, because the Prophet was calling on people to turn away from the idols they had worshipped and to believe in Allahu Azimushan, the one God, and to accept the existence and unity of Allah. If this invitation was accepted and the idols in Mecca were destroyed, the pagans in the Arabian region wouldn't come to Mecca and the income of the Meccan merchants would decrease, perhaps their wealth would end. In addition, the Quraysh were one of the most respected tribes in all the lands of Arabia. They worried that if they renounced the pagan beliefs of their ancestors, their reputations would be damaged throughout Arabia. Moreover, they didn't want to abandon the religions of their ancestors who had worshipped idols for centuries. For these and many other reasons, the polytheists of Mecca were trying to prevent the spread of Islam and were committing many atrocities against those who were Muslims. No one was shopping with the Muslims. The polytheists began to seize the powerless Muslims one by one, torture and murder them. Thereupon, the Prophet ordered the weak from the Muslims to migrate to Abyssinia because of the vicious tortures of Quraysh and to stay there until the salvation from nuisance that Muslims suffered. The persecution of Muslims had reached the level of savagery. It was impossible for Muslims to stay in Mecca because of those unbearable tortures. They presented their situation to the Prophet and asked for permission to migrate. So the Messenger of Almighty pointed out the ways to Medina and said, "From now on, your new destination for migration, a city which is a field of dates between two stony places, has shown me, and Allah Ta'ala has blessed you with a land where you will find brothers, sisters and peace." After that, the Muslims prepared without making the polytheists feel it, and they began to migrate secretly, one by one, helping each other. Thus, Medina became a shelter and refuge for Muslims. Meccan polytheists' fears came true. Islam had spread beyond Mecca and gained great prestige among the people of Medina. The Muslims of Medina welcomed their Muslim brothers and sisters from Mecca with embracing them and helped them wholeheartedly. For this reason, the Muslims of Mecca were called Muhajir and the Muslims of Medina were called Ansar, in the sense of those who helped. And Medina became a headquarters of the Muslims who made preparations to make the religion of Allah dominant one day. And leading everyone, the first are the Muhajirs and the Ansar, and those who followed them with virtue. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Him. And He has kept ready for them gardens, beneath which rivers flow, to abide in it forever and ever. This is the great attainment. The polytheists of Mecca couldn't digest the settlement and spread of Islam in Medina. And they were trying to cause mischief in Medina through hypocrites disguised as Muslims and Jews living in Medina in order to destroy Islam and Muslims. The polytheists of Mecca agreed with them and asked them not to give comfort to the Muslims in Medina and threatened that if they didn't listen and protected them, they would attack Medina with all their might and wouldn't leave anyone alive. In addition, they didn't give the Muslims comfort in Medina by sending bandits in small groups and plundering the herds and fields of the Muslims. Moreover, the polytheists of Mecca confiscated all the goods and property belonging to the Muhajirs in Mecca. Muslims were absolutely not allowed to perform their pilgrimage duties. The situation had become very delicate and more dangerous. Muslims stood guard in the streets of Medina at night and took all kinds of precautions against the possibility of sudden attacks from Jews and polytheists. The events began to unfold in such a way that the Messenger of Allah no longer had the opportunity to live in peace with the policy of patience and tolerance that he had followed until that day. It wasn't possible to live Islam without an Islamic state. As a matter of fact, when the Prophet saw that it wasn't enough for them to remain in position of defense after patience and endurance, he took refuge in his Lord and waited for the next revelation. Finally, at a time when the polytheists were becoming more and more violent, the verses that allowed the jihad, which had become a necessity for the preservation of religion, homeland and believers, were revealed. Fight in the way of Allah those who fight against you, but don't transgress. Indeed, Allah doesn't like transgressors. O you who have believed, take your precaution and go forth in companies or go forth all together. The Almighty explained the reason and goal of the war in this verse. Fight them until there is no fitna and the religion is completely Allah's. The order of war came from Allahu Azimuşşan. It was time to stop defending and go on the offensive. After those holy statements, Prophet Muhammad and his followers started to get ready in every aspect to fight against the polytheists. The Messenger of Allah sent troops out of Medina to keep Medina and its surroundings under control and established relations with the non-Muslim states in the vicinity, making peace treaties and explaining Islam to them. The number of Muslims was increasing day by day, and the Islamic State was getting stronger. Between the Muslims and the polytheists of Mecca, the law of war had now come into force. In response to the Meccan polytheists' attacks on preventing Islam, the Muslims also counterattacked. Medina was on the trade route the lifeblood of the polytheists of Mecca. The Muslims took advantage of this and prevented the Meccans from taking goods to Syria and trade by keeping the routes through which the trade caravans passed. These caravan attacks were made only on the caravans belonging to the Meccans, whom they were in war with, and the caravans of other non-Muslim states, whom they were not fighting against, were not touched. Many Sariyas and Ghazwas were organized against the polytheists of Mecca, such as the Sariya of Sif ul-Bahr, the Ghazwa of Ebwa, and the Batn al-Nahl expedition. That year, a very large caravan of the polytheists of Mecca was returning from the eastern Roman city of Damascus. This caravan was a large trade caravan consisting of 1,000 camels with a capital as large as 50,000 dinars. At the head of the caravan were 30 or 40 people, such as Abu Sufyan and Amr bin As, the leading figures of Mecca. The polytheists of Quraysh knew that the Muslims would retaliate for preventing them from performing the pilgrimage and seizing their property in Mecca. Abu Sufyan sent a man to Mecca to say that the caravan would be attacked by Muslims and asked them to gather an army and come to protect the caravan. When the news reached Mecca that the Muslims were going to attack the Quraysh caravan, the polytheists were terrified and angry. To protect the caravan goods, all the Meccans except Abu Lahab gathered an armed army of about 1,000 men, consisting of 100 horses and 700 camels to fight, and set off for the caravan, accompanied by concubines singing and playing deafs. The Messenger of Allah set out from Medina with an army of 313 men. 64 of the army were from the Muhajirs and the rest from the Ansar. 3 were horsemen, 70 of them were riding camels, and the others were pedestrians. The Prophet had previously sent scouts to investigate the caravan. The 2 scouts reached the Badr wells to make the camels drink water and made their camels sit. They heard 2 girls from the tribe of Juhayn talking at the wellhead. The girls were talking about the caravan staying in the valley of Rahwa tomorrow or the next day. When the Sahabis heard this, they set out to inform the Prophet of the situation. 2 miles away from Rahwa, they reached the Messenger of Allah and informed him of the situation. The Prophet then moved his army in the direction of Badr. At that time, Abu Sufyan had brought the caravan to the wells of Badr. He was thinking of staying here overnight, but he was afraid of being spied out. He asked Majdi if he had noticed anyone. Majdi said, "I have never seen anyone I don't like or an enemy between you and Medina. If there is an enemy between you and Medina, it won't be hidden to us, and I'm not going to hide it from you," he said, adding, "But I saw 2 strangers on their mounts. Here they made their camels drink water," he said, pointing to the place where the companions had their camels sit. Abu Sufyan took the camel's excrement in his hand and crumbled it. Inside he saw a palm kernel. "This is the date of Medina. The men here are also Muhammad's spies. I think they are close here." He gave up staying here. He turned the direction of the caravan towards the coast and began to move rapidly, taking Badr to his left. When he realized that he had secured the caravan, he said to the polytheists, "You set out for the caravan, Allah saved it. Get back now." Abu Jahl said, "We will not return until we reach Badr. We are going to sit there for 3 days, slaughter camels, eat and drink. Women will dance and sing. The Arabs in the vicinity will hear us too, and from now on they will always be afraid of us." When Abu Sufyan heard that the Quraysh army hadn't returned in obedience to Abu Jahl, he said, "Woe to my people. This is Abu Jahl's work. The fact that he doesn't want to go back is because of his love of being the head of people. It is wildness, and wildness brings shortage and misfortune." The Messenger of Allah realized that they were facing an inevitable life or death war now, because he was following political progresses step by step and gathered his companions. He asked, "Do you think it is more appropriate to follow the caravan or to meet the Quraysh army?" On behalf of the Muhajirs, Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhuma stood up and expressed their readiness to meet the Quraysh army. In the name of Ansar, Sa'd bin Muaz radiallahu anh stood up and said, "O the Messenger of Allah, we believed in you. We have witnessed that the Quran you have brought is true. Do as you wish. If you dive into the sea, we will dive with you. Not a single person from the Ansar will return." Upon these words of loyalty and submission, the blessed figure of the Prophet was filled with a smile. He prayed for charity and said, "So let us walk with the blessing of Allah. Good news to you that Allah has promised one of the two groups. It is as if I see the place where the Quraysh will be destroyed on the battlefield." The two armies lined up against each other in the battlefield on Friday, the 17th of Ramadan. It was a very hot day. Until then, Arabs always fought with a sense of tribe, such as lineage, race and kinship. Now religion had replaced the tribe. The sense of religious exaltation had eliminated the kinship temper that was so strong among the Arabs, such that some close relatives like father, uncle, child, sibling, cousin were on opposite sides. That day Abu Bakr and his son, Abu Ubaidah and his father, Hamza and his brother were foes. There is a great example for you in the case of these two groups that are facing each other. One is a group that fights in the cause of Allah, and the other one is a group of unbelievers who see them as twice as self. Allah supports whoever He wills with His help. Of course, there is a great example for those who are prudent in this. Three people from the Quraysh came forward and asked for three heroes from the Muslims. Thereupon Hazrat Hamza, Hazrat Ali and Hazrat Ubaidah appeared before them. Hazrat Hamza and Hazrat Ali easily knocked out their opponents. Ubaidah was wounded in the leg. Thereupon, with the order of Abu Jahl, the polytheistic army started the attack. In the Muslim lines, there were Allahu Akbar and La ilaha illallah shouts, which rose in a frightening pomegranate towards the ranks of blasphemy, never stopped, but excited the faithful hearts. Finally, the Messenger of Allah gave the order to attack. The two armies collided horribly. The fighting began violently and became increasingly violent. The Messenger of Allah ran among them to increase the zeal and enthusiasm of his companions and often recited this verse, that community will be defeated and they will turn around and flee. After these words, the Prophet turned to Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, who was with him, and said, "Good news, Gabriel and the angels came for help." Allah sent His angels to help the army of Islam. The lions of Badr attacked the polytheist army with all their might. The Battle of Badr was the struggle for the existence of Islam and faith. The Almighty also mobilized the army of angels in this war. The companions who participated in this first great jihad had the honor of being the most virtuous of the Muslims. The angels who participated in this holy duty in Badr also gained a greater honor than the other angels. The Islamic army gave 14 martyrs that day, while 70 polytheists were killed, including Abu Jahl of the Quraysh army. This battle was the first great victory of the Islamic State established in Medina. All over Arabia, the news that the polytheists of Mecca had been defeated by the army of Islam spread. The number of the people who wanted to convert to Islam began to increase. The control of the Badr wells and the Damascus trade routes had passed into the hands of the Muslims. The peace treaty between the Muslims and the Jews was broken because the Jews living in Medina didn't keep their promises to the Muslims and helped the polytheists of Quraysh. Therefore, the Jews were besieged by the Muslims in Medina and forced to emigrate. After Abu Jahl's death in Badr, Abu Sufyan became the head of the Quraysh. Quraysh notables whose relatives were killed by Muslims swore revenge.